Well, yes, you do have to do this week's readings. And yes, you do have to watch this week's lectures because I'm all but certain you actually don't know what I'm about to tell you. Why am I saying this? Why am I giving this prologue to this week's lectures? Well, I was teaching Intro to Christian Theology once, a class, a whole semester. It wasn't here, it was at a different school, but a student emailed me and said, Professor, I have to miss the first 2 weeks of class for an internship, but don't worry, I've gone to Catholic school for 12 years. I'm sure I know everything you're about to say. Really? Really, I thought. I spent 6 weeks trying to write 2 paragraphs of my doctoral dissertation about just one line of the Christian creed. It took me a really long time, a lot of work, just to write a page of my dissertation about Christian theology, about the Trinity. And you think that you can miss 2 weeks of class and you'll be fine because you took religion class in high school? And that little boy grew up to become the Secretary of State for Oregon. Do you believe me? You shouldn't. I just made that last part up. It's absurd. I can't believe I just lied like that. Okay, this week I'm giving you a quick primer on Christian theology. I think all of you should be a little surprised at some point this week as you go through the lectures. I'm hoping to catch all of you off guard at some point. Uh, I'm hoping that you see, I do this for a lot of reasons. One is, you're here at Loyola Marymount. It would be good if you had a basic understanding when you graduate a Jesuit Catholic school like this, if you had just the basic understanding of Christian theology. And that's what I'm aiming to do today. I'm not telling any of you you have to believe Christian theology. I'm not saying any of you have to convert and recite the creed. You might not even know what that refers to, the creed. I'm talking about something as simple as the Apostles' Creed that many Catholics learn as children, the Nicene Creed that Catholics recite in church every Sunday, the Apostles' Creed, which goes, I believe in God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. He was conceived by the Holy Spirit, incarnate of the Virgin Mary, and became human. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried. He rose again on the third day and ascended into heaven. He is seated at the right hand of the Father and will come again to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Amen. A lot of you probably know that just as well by heart as I do, maybe even better. I stumbled on a couple of lines there for some reason. It's rare that I say it out loud with my lips. That's what the creed is, and today I'm going to start saying things about the creed, because next week we're going to begin exploring 2 Christian contemplative traditions. First, the Benedictine tradition. What's that funny word, Benedictine? I'll explain it a little bit next week. And then we'll look at the Jesuit or Ignatian tradition. I hope you've heard the word Jesuit, like this school that you go to is a Jesuit school. It was founded by Saint Ignatius in yesterday, from when I'm recording this, September 27th, 1540 is when the Jesuit order was founded by Saint Ignatius. So I'm going to do 3 lectures this week. One on God. Have you heard of God? I'm going to do one on the Christian understanding of God, one on the Christian understanding of God specifically as Trinity, and finally, I'm going to have something to say at the end of this week about Jesus. So let's start. I believe in God. What does that mean? I believe in God. What does the Christian mean? What is the Christian supposed to mean by the statement, I believe in God? It's really it's really much more complicated than you'd think. For the Christian, oh, let me back up here a moment and say where I'm getting all this from. What is my own theological background here? Christianity, of course, is a big, diverse uh, ground to point to. Lots of people go by the name Christian, and it's not like they all agree. My understanding of Christian theology comes by way of a guy called Thomas Aquinas. He lived in the 13th century. He died in 1274. And who cares what he thinks? Well, lots of people do. A lot of people consider Thomas Aquinas the Christian theologian par excellence. In fact, in the Catholic Church, he's considered kind of the paradigm theologian. At the end of the 19th century, Pope Leo XIII said as much. He wrote a papal document, a big long letter to the whole Catholic Church. These letters that the popes write to the whole Catholic Church are called encyclicals. And Pope Leo XIII wrote one of these encyclicals and said, if you want to understand Christian theology, start by reading Thomas Aquinas. You don't have to agree with him on everything, said the Pope, but this is the place to begin. And so, since this is just a beginner's kind of crash course in Christian theology, I'm speaking to you as somebody who studies Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas had quite a bit to say about just what it means to say one believes in God. What on earth is a person talking about when they say, I believe in God, or when they talk about God at all? There's a wonderful story about Thomas Aquinas that when he was very young, maybe 12 or 13, he was in a religion class. And his teacher, a guy by the name of Big Al, was going on, as religion teachers sometimes do, about God this and God that. And Aquinas, young little boy, finally had enough. He said, enough! You keep using that word, God, but you haven't told us what it means. Well, we in the Christian tradition understand by the word God the creator of everything. Now you might say, yeah, fine, whatever. Except creation is a very mysterious thing. Imagine, if you will, a little child in England, 5 years old. This little 5-year-old child in England has never heard of America. Okay, that's believable. A little 5-year-old kid in England's never heard of America. But the 5-year-old hears an adult say, you know, if it weren't for America, we wouldn't have Kentucky Fried Chicken. That little kid now knows more about America than we know about God. Of course, the little kid has no idea whether America is a country, a cooking technique, an economic system, a chef, a person. But the child does know that if not for America, he wouldn't have Kentucky Fried Chicken. Well, we're even more ignorant when it comes to God when we think about the statement at the beginning of the Bible, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. You've heard that 1,000 times. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. What does it mean? If you can tell me, if you can actually give me an idea what that means, here's my promise. Here's my guarantee. You all have my phone number. It's on the syllabus. Stop this video. Call me up right now and help me understand what the statement, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, actually means. Now, let me point out, when I ask for what it actually means, I mean something like this. If you were to tell me that old Mr. Thompson killed Buttercup, I could ask you, what do you mean old Mr. Thompson killed Buttercup? And you would tell me what it means. You might say, oh, Mr. Thompson, my second grade teacher, he wasn't paying attention when he turned around the corner in his Cadillac and he ran over my cat, who was called Buttercup. Okay, now I have a pretty good idea. It's not complete, but I have a pretty good idea of what you mean when you say old Mr. Thompson killed Buttercup. You don't mean that Mr. Thompson forgot to feed something. I know who Mr. Thompson is. He was your second grade teacher. I know who Buttercup is. That was your cat. I know how Buttercup got killed. Okay, I've got a pretty good idea of what you mean by Mr. Thompson killed Buttercup. Go ahead. Try to tell me what in the beginning God created heaven and earth means. Go ahead. Just try. I don't think you can. Why not? Oh, how do I explain this? This is so hard to explain in the time I have left. Aquinas thinks that the God question is really a question about the universe. You know, the universe that's all around you, that you interact with every day. There's basically two possibilities, thinks Aquinas. One possibility is that everything in the universe can be accounted for to our own intellectual satisfaction. I wish to repeat. One possibility, and this is, by the way, the atheist option, one possibility is that everything in the universe can be understood, accounted for, to our intellectual satisfaction. Option two is that it can't. Okay, let me cash out option one, just to be sure we're on the same page here. Tell me anything in the universe, anything whatsoever. Yes, you there. What? Oh, what's that? Ah, something in the universe is that you have to get up and use the bathroom. Yes, go ahead. Go. That's a true fact about the universe, that has to get up and go use the bathroom. And I can understand that if I want to. I can understand human anatomy. I can understand what makes a person have to get up and go use the bathroom. It has to do with how food and drink interact with our internal digestive system. Cheers. And once I understand the human digestive system and food and water and drink and things like that, now I understand. I've satisfied my intellectual curiosity about why people sometimes get up and go to use the bathroom. And when you go to school, you learn that there's quite a bit to the universe. There's a lot. The universe is huge, and there's tons of stuff to learn about. And as you go through school, you keep learning more and more things, and you keep learning accounts, scientific accounts of those things. You learn about the tides going in and out because of the moon. And then you learn about gravity. And you learn all kinds of things. For Aquinas, and indeed for the Christian tradition that I'm talking about, the whole, and I might add that this, by the way, also the tradition of Judaism and Islam. Everything I say today in this lecture unlike the next two. Everything I say in this lecture is equally true of Islam and Judaism, traditionally, historically speaking. To say God exists on these traditions is to say that the universe is not sufficient to account for itself. And if you take Intro to Philosophy with me, here at LMU, it's called Philosophical Inquiry, I'll require you to memorize the following statement. For Aquinas, the statement God exists just means there are features of the universe which ought to be causally accounted for, but which cannot be causally accounted for by any other feature of the universe. You want me to say it again? I'll say it 2 more times. The statement God exists on this tradition just means there are features of the universe which ought to be causally accounted for, but which cannot be causally accounted for by any other feature of the universe. What's a feature of the universe? You name it. You're at home right now, or wherever you are, watching this lecture. That's a feature of the universe. Now, it obviously doesn't have to be. You could be doing any number of things right now. You could be eating at Taco Bell. You could be sleeping. You could be watching a Law and Order marathon. And instead, you're watching me give a lecture about what the Christian tradition understands by the word God. Well, that's weird. How do I account for this? Surely it's reasonable to ask why you're watching this lecture right now instead of watching Law and Order, instead of eating at Taco Bell, instead of any number of other things. And look, this feature of the universe, I can causally account for it in terms of another feature of the universe. Like, you want a college degree. Like, you can't be in class because of a big scary pandemic. Like, you want to get a good job, and that's why you're taking these classes at LMU. Look at that. I've causally accounted for a feature of the universe in terms of other features of the universe. Cool, huh? Sure. Also kind of boring, theologically speaking. Well, some people argue that there are features of the universe which cannot be causally accounted for by other features of the universe. Like what, you ask? Like existence. Like the question, why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever? And I'm not here, by the way, asking about something that happened a long time ago. No. For all I know, there's always been a universe. And by the way, this is borne out by astrophysics, right? We can trace our timeline back to a singularity about 15 billion years ago, known as the Big Bang, at which point we know that there was what's in quantum physics known as a singularity, an infinitely dense point in space and time. If you want to know more about that, you can take a class here at LMU that I've taught called Quantum Physics and Theology. And you go back far enough to something called a Planck instant, which is a unit of time too small to measure back before. And for all we know, for all we can know, the quantum physicists tell us, that singularity that's just there. There's no point wondering about what's before that because we can't scientifically tell. One hypothesis not currently in favor is called the oscillating universe. That the universe constantly expands, contracts, and there's another Big Bang, and then contracts again into a so-called Big Crunch, and then expands again. You get the picture. So the question of God isn't about something that happened a long time ago. It's about the question of what is the source of existence right now? What is providing existence to things right now? And that seems to be a completely reasonable question. If I walk into a room and I see a pot of water boiling, I am entitled to ask, why is it boiling? And I might discover that beneath it there's a flame. Well, I'm entitled to ask, what's making that flame combust? And I might discover that beneath the flame are some pipes with gases interacting. Again, you get the idea. Well, the question is, why anything at all? I can ask, why my cat, Mr. Whiskers? I can ask, why cats, can't I? Why are some animals cats? Well, because some of them go meow, 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 and purr, purr, purr. That's why. Well, why animals? Well, because it turns out that some members of the biological community have critter capacities. You're thinking, what are critter capacities? Critter capacities are the abilities to move around and perceive and do all the things animals generally do. Well, why is there a biological community? You can see I can keep going. Why Mr. Whiskers? Why cats? Why animals? Why a biological community? Why stuff? Why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever? Now, on the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, if you think that question, why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever, is a legitimate question, then you are considered theist. And you say, well, but I think it's a legitimate question, but I don't believe there's some top person called others. Yeah, that's exactly the point. Christianity, Judaism, Islam does not proclaim there's some top person named God calling all the shots. I'm not making this up. I'm getting this straight out of Aquinas. According to this tradition, the existence of God is simply a matter of the universe not being able to account for itself, of the universe not being able to answer the question, why anything? Why existence? Now, here's where things get really hard. Okay, you say, that's a legitimate question. Why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever? It's a legitimate question because it's reasonable to believe that there's an answer. Now, we're going to just give the answer the name God. That's what Jews, Christians, Muslims have traditionally done, albeit in different languages, right? Aquinas never heard the word God. He heard Deus from the Greek word theos. In the Middle East, the word is Allah, right? These are all labels given to whatever it is that answers the question, why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever? Now, get ready. Here comes the twist. If you think about it, you'll see pretty quickly that whatever it is that answers the question, why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever, can't be one of the things. Let me say that again. Whatever the answer to the question is, why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever, it can't be one of the things. I'm going to say that one more time, and I swear, if you're not on the floor, brought to tears, mind blown, brain hurting, then you haven't really listened to what I'm saying. The answer to the question, why anything at all, instead of nothing whatsoever, cannot be one of the things. What follows from this? I mean, there's a very real sense in which the Christian, the Jew, the Muslim can say God doesn't exist. In fact, Thomas Aquinas, that guy that the Pope said is like the top theologian for the Catholic Church, that guy, Thomas Aquinas, once said, God is not one of the existent things. I can show you the line in Latin where he says this. God is outside the order of existence, says Aquinas in his commentary on Aristotle's De Interpretatione. God is not one of the existent things. In other words, according to the tradition I'm trying to explain, the difference between theists and atheists is not a matter of the theist's list of things, the total list of things, the complete inventory, being one item longer. That's not what theism is on this tradition. I once heard a comedian, it might have been Ricky Gervais. I once heard a comedian say that he has quite a bit in common with Christians, in that the Christian has a whole list of gods he doesn't believe in, Zeus and so on. The only difference, said this atheist comedian, is that my list of gods I don't believe in has one more name on it. It seems to me that this comedian, clever though he thought he was, completely missed the point of theism in this tradition. The Christian, the Jew, the Muslim, operating on this and this tradition, by the way, is called classical theism. I'm going to put that on the board. Classical theism. Classical theism is the school of thought where God refers to the creator, and thinking about God, our use of the word God should always be firmly centered on what it means to speak about creation. It should always be centered on the effort to talk about the creator. Creating, by the way, is not the same as making, although it's similar. Let me show you how. This is, by the way, why I don't believe you could stop this video and call me and tell me what you think the statement God creates the heavens and the earth means. Let me tell you what creating is. We have to begin with the concept making. Now, what does it mean to make something? I wish to propose that making has two components, taking and turning. If I want to make a cup of tea, I take some water, and by putting a bag into it and then boiling it, I turn it into a cup of tea. If I wish to make a statue, I take a block of marble and I turn it into the figure of Scarlett Johansson. She deserves a statue, doesn't she? So making is taking and turning. Now, I want you to think about making in these very general terms, but drop the part about taking. Get the taking part out of there. Pretty hard, but you kind of got it? Good. Now, also get rid of the turning part. So you start with making, conceived of as taking and turning. Get rid of the taking, get rid of the turning, and what you're left with is creating. Ah, pretty hard to think about? Not only hard, impossible. Not impossible to be the fact that God creates, just impossible to think about. Oh, oh. You can only think about it through this kind of reverse process. In fact, Aquinas believes much of our theological thinking has to go through this reverse process. What else is the case of God if God is what's responsible for there being anything instead of nothing? Well, God can't be one of the things. That means God can't belong to some kind of thing. Let me say that again. God can't belong to a kind. Tell me something that doesn't belong to a kind. My cat? Oh, I just said my cat. Mr. Whiskers, she's a cat. That's the kind she belongs to. Go ahead. Tell me something that doesn't belong to a kind. You can't do it, can ya? You know what it's like playing 20 questions with Aquinas and he's thinking of God? You keep asking him, rock, mineral, person, and he says no. Emotion? No. Bigger than a bread box? No. Smaller than a bread box? No. Made up of parts? No. Made up of matter? No. A feeling? No. A belief? No. That is what Thomas Aquinas looks like when you play 20 questions with him and he's thinking of God. Now, I say thinking of God, but I'm speaking loosely. Why? Because if God doesn't belong to any kind of thing, then you can't think about God. You can't think of God, I should say. Why? Because to really think of something, to gain any kind of understanding of something, you can only do that, first, if you know what kind of thing it is. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I'm going to talk about quaddlepuck. Quaddlepuck. Suppose I ask you to go into the room next door and tell me if there's any quaddlepucks in there. You can't do it, can you? Because I haven't told you what quaddlepuck is. Well, suppose I told you quaddlepuck loves me. You don't know what quaddlepuck is, but I'm telling you quaddlepuck loves me. But you really don't know what that means either. After all, quaddlepuck is my child. It means one thing. It means that I tell you quaddlepuck is a 5-year-old child, my 5-year-old son. It means quaddlepuck, loves me the way a 5-year-old loves his father. If I tell you quaddlepuck is the name I use for my wife, well, then you're quite entitled to think that quaddlepuck's a person about my age. And by quaddlepuck loves me, you're going to understand that there's probably a sexual component. If I tell you quaddlepuck is my kitten, well, then you better hope that there's no sexual component. And love now is going to mean something quite a bit different, although still in the general ballpark, right? To talk about quaddlepuck, to think about quaddlepuck at all, you have to know what kind of thing quaddlepuck is. I could even tell you quaddlepuck is my microwave. And you say, but you said quaddlepuck loves you. Sure. Nobody else seems to be able to get my microwave to work except me. Well, sure. I mean, we talk about that like that sometimes, right? We talk like that. Okay. Well, if God is the answer to the question, why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever, then God doesn't belong to a kind. And if God doesn't belong to a kind, that means it's impossible for you to even begin getting an intellectual grasp on God. You haven't the foggiest idea how to begin thinking about God. If we think about God in the classical theist tradition. Where does that leave us? With utter mystery. That question Aquinas asked, what is God? He never answered and never pretended to. Aquinas championed what's known as the via negativa, negative theology. We stress what God is not, said Aquinas. A God is not one of the things, said Aquinas. Not an aardvark, not an animal, not a cat, not a dog, not an elephant, not a person, not a system, not a temperature, not a subatomic particle, none of those. Anything you can think of, God won't be it. In fact, God is so utterly mysterious that although real, we have to admit that God's not one of the things. So, if we're going to talk about Christian theology, we have to start there. We have to start with the admission that when the Christian says, I believe in God, the Christian is not saying, I believe there's one more thing than what other people believe in. If you said, I believe in the Loch Ness Monster, you would be telling me you believe there's one more thing than what many other people believe. I, for one, do not believe that there is, in the Loch Ness in Scotland, a large amphibious beast previously uncategorized by science. Sorry, the weirdest thing just happened to me. I was lecturing, as you've been watching me, and I'm looking at my phone. I got one call from a friend, and I ignored it because I'm teaching. Then a second call right after it from a different friend, and I ignored it because I'm teaching. Then a third call, and I thought, is something happening? Has there been, some major news development that everyone's calling me about? No, pure coincidence. Pure coincidence. Okay. Well, to conclude, I want to impress upon you that for Christian theology, God is utterly mysterious. We do not know what God is, not the faintest clue, no idea. And that understanding, by the way, is crucial to the Christian mystical tradition, to the Christian contemplative tradition. What we're leaping into in Christian mysticism is the unknown, is the complete unknown. So, I'll just leave it there. I mean, I've given you a lot to think about, I hope. Next, I'm going to talk about the Christian doctrine that God is something called Trinity. Then I'm going to talk, lastly, about the Christian doctrine that Jesus is God and has something important to do with this story. But for now, just try to focus on this idea that for Christianity, God is the ultimate question mark. Okay, bye-bye.